Dr. Maritza, I am so excited for this conversation and to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Dr. Stephanie, for having me. I am so excited to be here. We are going to get in it.
We are going to get in it. And we are going to go really deep today. And I just wanted to highlight for my listeners the type of human being you are. We are going to obviously highlight your expertise, and we're going to talk about all the things that you know about, females and estrogen dominance and perimenopause and postmenopause. But I just wanted to share that the quality of human that you are, and publicly thank you because people are going to be listening to this, how you've helped me. I remember when I was thinking about transitioning and closing my physical practice, you were like, let's jump on a call. I'm going to walk you through what it was like for me when I closed my clinical practice and how some of the trials and tribulations that I went through. And then last August, we were in a mastermind together, and I was telling you, so now I've closed my clinic and I'm going to start this podcast. And you're like, okay, these are the things you need to do. These are the things that I learned that you don't do. You have to have a hashtag, all these different things that you just so willingly shared with me. And I just think that you are a general cheerleader for, you've been a cheerleader for me. I know I've listened to your podcast. I'm a fan as well as a colleague of yours. I know you're a cheerleader for many female physicians. So I'm really excited to highlight you today in our conversation.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. Well, I feel 100% the same about you. You are such a rock star. And I'm so, so, so grateful that you are doing this work in the world that you're doing, Dr. Stephanie. Thank you.
Oh, so we are gonna lift the proverbial skirt today. We're gonna lift the skirt. We're gonna go into perimenopause and menopause. But just before we do, for those of my listeners that have not heard of you before, and by the way, I should say that this is a really important conversation. This is a big part of who my audience is. So I know they're going to get a lot of value out of today. But I often believe, and I will credit Philip McKernan with this. He has said, your gifts are right beside your wounds. And I truly believe that that is the case for me. I believe that many of us become doctors because we want to heal ourselves by healing others. So maybe, you are a women's hormone expert. Maybe you can explain, how you fell into this line of work.
Absolutely. I was in practice and I had a lot of incredible female patients, amazing women patients who were taking on the world like so many women do. And they had a number of different symptoms that just weren't adding up, and they weren't getting the answers that they were looking for from other doctors. And it just wasn't really clear about what was going on. They just knew they didn't feel like themselves anymore, and they wanted to get their bodies back. They wanted to feel like themselves again. They wanted to be alert. They wanted to have that energy. They wanted to be able to be the superwoman that they used to be, living the life that they live today. And at the time, it was a cluster of symptoms that I hadn't really seen a lot of. Like, I focused a lot on migraine pain. I focused a lot on women who were having struggles with sleep, but I found that women were struggling across the board. And it was around this time that I started having some really severe hormone issues. And it wasn't as though it happened overnight. I had been getting sluggish in the afternoon. I had some mood swings. My periods were inconsistent. And I remember asking friends and family, even colleagues, like, is this normal for me to be dealing with this? And everybody said, yes. Like, this is how women operate. Welcome to the world of being a woman. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to keep doing what I do. I'm going to keep moving through life. But the symptoms kept on getting worse and worse and worse. And I remember one day, just a defining moment, 7 a.m., wake up to go get ready to go see my patients. I had about 25 patients to see that day. And I'm about to get out of bed because I hear the alarm. And it's as if this invisible hand is shoving me, like pressing me back into bed. And I can't even lift my head up off the pillow. And I remember there was like this sheer panic that moved through me really quickly, because I was like, wait, why can I not get up? And then it was a command of, Maritza, get up. You've got patients, the laundry list of things, check,
Mm-hmm.
went through my mind. And I was like, I cannot not show up to work today. And I eventually crawled out of bed. I made it to the bathroom. I crawled into the bathroom and was able to get myself ready. And I remember looking in the mirror at that time. And I remember looking at myself. When you have that real moment when you see yourself for who you are. And I literally, I felt like I was a fraction of who I had been. Like I was this like zombie in the mirror. And I remember thinking to myself, like, how are you going to take care of your patients if you can't even take care of yourself? And it was at this time I was trying to figure out what was going on with me, this severe, debilitating chronic fatigue. Like it was enough for me to get to work, and then I just crashed at the end of the day every day. And I was literally just 30 years old when this was happening to me. So friends of mine recommended me to a hormone doctor, because it's always recommended to never diagnose yourself. Don't diagnose yourself.
Dr.
Um,
Google is a dangerous doctor to visit. Yes.
and I really didn't know exactly what was going on. Like even this was in, this was 11 years ago or so. And we weren't really looking at this to the extent of which we're looking at it today. So much has shifted in the last decade around women's health. We were kind of just shoving women to the side and just kind of just telling them they were crazy. So I went to the doctor, got the labs done, and sure enough, it was like hormone hot mess. I mean, it was all over the place. And the doctor, she was a specialized in hormones, but an OBGYN, she gave me 2 prescriptions as a solution. One of them was birth control, and the other one was Xanax. And I remember looking down at these prescriptions, knowing what I know. I was a biochemist in the past, and I'd been, a practitioner in my own right for quite some time. And I just remember I felt so defeated. I felt alone. I felt dismissed. And I remember handing back the prescriptions, because I knew in my gut, in my heart, that these were not going to get me out of my chronic fatigue. This wasn't going to help me bounce back and get my energy back. Honestly, I didn't know if I was ever going to get that energy back again. And I sat in my car outside of the doctor's office. I just remember crying because I felt so lost. And there was this moment of resolution of, you've got to figure this out. You are the person that has got to figure this out. And I had always been a great researcher, and I knew there was a part of me, this hope in me, that said there were doctors doing this work. There were people who were really looking at this from a root cause perspective. And so I decided, one, I was going to start figuring out what was going on with me. And number 2, I realized as I sat in the car, how many other women have sat in their car crying outside of a doctor's office, feeling like they literally walked out with the same answers that they came in with, which was nothing.
Right.
They felt just as lost as when they came in the door. And I wanted to be a part of that solution. I didn't want to continue to be a part of the problem. And that was in that moment, I decided that I had to be one of millions. Especially at 30 years old, there had to be women 35, 40, maybe even 25 who were struggling the way that I was struggling, and were put on Xanax and didn't know to question it. And
Yes.
that has been my life's pursuit. Every day I wake up with that mission in mind, is how do we educate women? How do we empower women? How do we help support women take ownership of their wellness, especially when it comes to their hormones, because it's the thing that can just completely shut us down. Yeah.
Oh man, that's such gold right there. And I would also add to what you're saying, like 10 years ago, these conversations weren't happening. It was, you had to put on, and I think this still happens today, where we still have to put on this facade of everything's great, nothing's going, how are you? Oh, I'm great. How are you? Like there's no connection and there's no medium for dialogue and discourse. So this is why I'm really excited to be having this conversation with you right now. And
Me too.
there's a number of nerdy rabbit holes that I want to go down with you. I thought the way to really talk about hormones in a way that is going to make sense for our perimenopausal and menopausal women today is to start by potentially dissecting some of the more common clinical presentations that we see that happen before we get to perimenopause. So, your story would be included in that, because those are going to necessarily aggravate it when you get to perimenopause, when you get to menopause. And when I'm talking about clinical presentations, I want to talk about estrogen dominance. I want to talk about chronic fatigue, which you just mentioned in your story. And then I would like to, if we have some, I know that these are big topics, but I would also like to maybe touch on androgen dominance as well. And if we don't get to PCOS and testosterone excess, it'll be on the next time that you're on the show. But let's start off with estrogen dominance, because I find that it's a little bit easier for women to identify whether they have estrogen dominance, because they can look at their menstrual cycle for clues. So
Absolutely.
can you walk a woman who's listening through, if she wants to look at her period or just her menstrual cycle in general, how could she tease out some of the clues of what estrogen dominance looks like? And then we'll parse this with a conversation around cortisol and chronic fatigue.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about estrogen dominance. And where estrogen dominance really kind of rears its head in our kind of in a world of women. And I've had estrogen dominance. I don't know if you have struggled with estrogen
Same.
dominance yourself. Yeah. So
Me
many
too.
of us are dealing with estrogen dominance. And the real reason is one of the biggest reasons where we're seeing so many women dealing with estrogen dominance is a lot of environmental stressors that we are having a really difficult time avoiding. Things from diesel fuel to pesticides, glyphosate, parabens, plastics, solvents. I mean, they're things that we, as much as we try to avoid, we have to get on the road, or we have to go out into the world. We have to get on a plane. Those things are adding up over time. The other number one stressor that is driving estrogen dominance is literally perceived stress. And we'll talk about cortisol in just a moment. So estrogen dominance doesn't necessarily mean that we have a really severe uptick in estrogen. It's just in relationship to progesterone. And if we really wanted to look at that, the test that I always recommend, kind of that gold standard to kind of look and see what is going on, is going to be the Dutch test, right?
Yes.
That will
Yes.
give us a sense of literally estrogen metabolites. We can look all the way down the pathways and see what our bodies are breaking down, what our liver and our gut is breaking down in those phases. But ways in which that you kind of know that you may be dealing with estrogen dominance, one, fibrocystic or tender breasts, especially getting closer to our period or during our period. Heavy and menstruation, and maybe not every month is heavy, but some months are definitely heavier than others. So really heavy bleeding, blood clots could be a situation. Maybe if we're developing fibroids, although we wouldn't be able to see that necessarily with our menstruation. I mean, yes, you could definitely have heavier bleeding because of fibroids, but
Mm-hmm.
that would need to be looked at in a diagnostic way. If you are having heavy bleeding, it may be worth looking at that, but really we should be looking at that estrogen dominance. Other things that we're going to see: brain fog, bloating around the hips, the thighs, weight distribution around the hips and thighs are going to be another one as well. Mood swings, depression is going to be something that we're going to be experiencing around our period. So those are kind of some of the tall tale signs that we may be dealing with estrogen dominance compared to progesterone inside of the body.
Yeah, I often joke that the proper name for estrogen dominance is actually estrogen dominance in the luteal phase of our cycle, right?
Yes.
Or unopposed estrogen in the luteal. So this is just way too long and complicated for people. So the shortening to estrogen dominance is appropriate here. And I also very much have a tendency to run estrogen dominant. The big clue for me, what you just said, was always tender breasts. So
Mm-hmm.
I would, the last week or two, someone would come in for a hug and I would like awkwardly like redirect their hands to like shake them, because if I knew if I hugged someone, I was going to cry. Like my boobs were so tender. And I remember, talking about stress and estrogen together. It was 2016. So I was going through a divorce at the time, and I found a lump in my breast. And of course, your mind goes right to cancer. I'm going to die. My children are going to grow up without a mother. And this was really the starting point for me when I said, okay, I really have to start paying attention to my hormones. You have like the stress of the separation, you're moving, my periods. Like I was still in clinic at the time, and I would have to bring a change of pants at the first couple days of my period because the bleeding was so heavy. I would almost guarantee that I would go right through my pants even before, like I would bleed right through my pants right before, even just on my travels to work. So, um, I mean, the cyst, the lump ended up being just a cyst, but this is really, a good example of how, acute stress, but also, having a pre-existing predisposition to having estrogen dominance can really wreak havoc on the body. And you mentioned something, I just wanted to circle back to it. You said, it's not necessarily that estrogen dominance is so high, but it's that our that the sister hormone, progesterone, isn't higher than estrogen in that second half, in that luteal phase of the cycle. So let's talk a little bit about low progesterone, because this is gonna, I mean, some of the symptoms, there's a lot of overlap, but some of the symptoms around low progesterone, what would those be for the listener?
Absolutely. Kind of similar, low progesterone and estrogen dominance can look very similar. One of the things I did mention too, if women are having headaches or migraines
Oh yeah.
right before their period or right at their period, that is a good telltale sign for estrogen dominance. So with low progesterone is PMS. If we're dealing with PMS symptoms, when we are getting towards the beginning of our menstrual cycle, so the beginning of our period, we know that those hormones, progesterone, testosterone, and estrogen, are going to take a nosedive. Why it was created that way for us, I'm not exactly sure. But especially if progesterone isn't at the level we want it to be, like at day 19, day 20, day 21 of our luteal cycle, when it takes that nosedive, we're going to feel it. We're going to feel that impact. So again, major mood swings, bloating, distribution of weight, maybe even bowel movements change as well, because our digestive system shifts and switches in a way. Like you may end up having either constipation or diarrhea. You're just feeling super bloated and gassy. The headaches are going to come on. The breast tenderness is going to happen as well. And it's just going to be that kind of time where emotions are going to be soaring up and down depending on what's going on. Those are kind of the classic signs for low progesterone levels. At least for what I know personally, and when I've talked to thousands of women, that's kind of the distribution. Clearly, there's a lot of other symptoms where we can land when it comes to PMS and low progesterone, but those are oftentimes where we see the symptoms.
Yeah, and those are sort of the clinical hallmarks. The only other thing I would add on to that is sometimes you'll see spotting. So I
Yes,
remember I had a
yes.
woman once that was like, I don't know when my period starts. It's just I sort of spot for a week. I'm like, oh, okay, that's the progesterone being really low. And I'll share with you a really funny story, and this around PMS, because even someone, you have formal training in the subject matter. I have formal training, but sometimes, at least for me, maybe I'm just slow, but sometimes you can't see it in yourself. I can remember saying to Giovanni, it was, I don't know, maybe it's a year ago. I said, I don't know what it is, but like at least once a month, I hate everyone. Like I just want to, everyone aggravates me. I just want to throat punch everybody. Like why are people so dumb? Like, why is it everyone else's problem? And so he's, being the smart male that he is, like, just sort of like, deer in a headlight, like didn't say anything. He was like,
He's like,
uh, every month, honey, like this time of the month, you should. So we just sort of stared at each other for 20 seconds and I was like, oh my God, I have PMS. That's what that is. Like, I hate everyone because I have PMS. So
it's so true. My
yeah,
husband knows my entire cycle.
yeah,
Everyone knows. And here's the thing, and what I love so much, we're having the conversation of what it looks like, but oh my gosh, what is possible? I really do want to paint that picture. And environment and how we take care of our bodies is everything. So last October, I was running a summit for women's hormones. We were raising a ton of money, and it was a stressful month. The self-care that I normally do every day, I was like, I don't need it this month. I can just put it over here. And
mhm,
I was just late nights. I probably was at times probably eating things I shouldn't have had. I was probably drinking more coffee than normal because I was working later.
right,
And oh my gosh, when November came around, girl, it was like a Mack truck hit me upside the head. It was one of
right,
the worst periods I had in like 7 months. And it was because I was like, oh my gosh, how did I treat myself last month in October?
yeah,
And I was like, oh my God, yes, all the things I normally do, all the ways in which I take care of myself, I just let it go.
yeah,
I didn't let all of it go, but because some of it's so automatic. And then there's months where I am so good to me. I am nourishing me. I am taking care of me. And man, it is like ease and grace. My period comes and goes and no one knew.
right.
Almost not even me.
Yeah, you're like, oh, there she is. Yeah,
Oh, no warning sign or nothing. There you are. I mean, I track it and everything, but
yeah,
my husband's like, wow, what? This is weird, And so the beautiful thing is we really have a lot of control around how our hormones are functioning. So I want to tease that a little bit. I know we're getting to that.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned that because you really cannot appreciate how glorious your menstruation can be until you get that period where your breasts feel soft, they're not lumpy, you feel great, and there's no bloating. And yeah, so we are definitely going to get there, but we'll just hang that carrot for a moment. So I know one of the things I know about you is you are very much an integrative practitioner. We know that estrogen dominance doesn't happen in a tube; it doesn't happen, in and of itself. You mentioned liver and gut. I would love for you to describe. So when a woman comes to you and you've done the Dutch test, or she's subjectively telling you, I have all these clots in my period and breast tenderness, fibrocystic, all this stuff. What what are some of the areas that you like to focus on? And they can be, from we can look at this in terms of systems like liver and detoxification, and like what are some of the areas that you like to work on with respect to their health?
Absolutely. I think the major areas, and I could absolutely go down the pathways. I'm going to keep this. We have so much to cover too. I want to keep it simple. So I want to do is kind of give the solutions. No surprise that when it comes to breaking down our hormones, metabolizing our hormones, breaking down those hormones, even converting hormones, the liver is playing a major role in the creation, breakdown, and conversion of hormones. And it's one of those organs that is doing a million jobs every second of the day, and there's no reward. The liver is not getting rewarded.
She's the hardest working girl,
It
isn't she?
is
Yeah.
she is the hardest working girl
Yeah.
in the body, and yet we're just like, keep just keep working, honey. And so we really don't honor and love our liver. And what we have to look at, particularly if we look at estrogen is broken down in the liver. It's
Yep.
broken down in phase one, it's broken then down, and it's conjugated in phase two, and then it's sent into the gut. A lot of people do not know that the gut is phase three of estrogen metabolism. And if our gut isn't properly working, that our microbiome isn't happy, and that we have we're having bowel movements on the regular, those estrogen metabolites can actually recirculate back into the body and begin to create some pretty crazy upheaval inside of the system. So it's really important, no surprise, not just for estrogen, but for progesterone, for thyroid, for cortisol, for all of the hormones that allow us to function every day. Because remember, hormones are simply chemical messengers. They're messengers who are relaying information to the body from different cells, different systems in the body, from the brain to the body, from the body to the brain. And they are just trying to do their best. They're trying to do their best job with what they've got right at that moment. And I always want people to know that the hormones, our hormone system, our endocrine system, isn't trying to fail us. Your estrogen didn't decide one day to sabotage you. It really didn't. It's just we got to make sure that our system, our body's working well, our gut is fully supported, our liver is fully supported, so that our hormones have the necessary nutrients, have the necessary ability to break themselves down, and that can leave the body once they're used. Right? I always say with estrogen, you need to use it and lose it, and that's
Yeah.
the purpose of estrogen.
I love that.
Estrogen knows that job, but if it's I guess estrogen says, girl, I've been used, it's time for me to get on out. But if we don't have the system in place, if our liver is struggling, if it's feeling sluggish because we drank a bottle of wine last night, or we've been, we took we're having to take a ton of medications or whatever that may be. If your liver is having to manage other burdens, it prioritizes. Our body's always going to prioritize survival over anything else. And if it's got to prioritize, we've got to take care of a toxic load over breaking down that estrogen. Well, your liver is gonna make that decision. And so we want to make sure that every system that is focusing on our hormones, ensuring that our hormones work, are being fully supported as well. And I have recommendations on that. But I did just want to mention that your hormones are not sabotaging you. They really are doing the best that they can with what they've got. It's oftentimes those root causes, those underlying root causes that are throwing things off, and we can get to those as well. Yes.
Yeah. And I would say for all the type A ladies that are listening who like to ignore the symptoms that your body tells you, which I am in that category as well. When my body tells me something, I'm like, shut up. I'll deal with it later. Like you just stop talking. I got to put my head down and push through. So I really appreciate what you're saying, but for the women who are, this is especially true for high achieving driven women, we tend to think that our body is failing us but really what it is just we have been ignoring the symptoms, the messages that your body's been trying to tell you for so long, that your signals and your symptoms are going to get louder and louder until you pay attention.
Yeah, I don't want any woman to end up where I was at that day at 7 in the morning, where I literally I couldn't lift my body up out of bed. It was the scariest moment. And it took years to get to that place. I remember thinking that stress, adrenaline, that it was fuel that I could leverage. I had this
Yeah.
really warped idea or vision for what my body was just trying to survive. And I was like, ooh, I'm going to leverage that and use it.
Yeah.
And I just kept doing that until I found myself on the ground. And yeah, the symptoms are just going to get louder and louder and louder. I always say that your hormones are the first to throw up the white flag. They're the ones who are going to wave the white flag. They're the first indicators that something isn't right. And I can definitely name, we talked about some of those indicators already today, indicators that we think that people have normalized, that we have just normalized as normal. It's not like I didn't check in with people. I was like, is this normal for me? And everyone's
Mhm.
like, oh yeah. Like if you're not feeling this way, clearly you're not living the way the superwoman needs to be living. Like this is how superwomen feel. And that I was like, okay, well, I must be doing my job if I'm wearing myself down over time.
Right. So let's parse this then with
Yeah.
with stress, because I think that you've beautifully segued it and queued it up for me, even though that was the next topic. But you are really an expert here, and most of us, to your point, like to brush it off. We like to put our head down and power through. We like to ignore the physiological consequences that cortisol and stress, chronic low grade inflammation and stress can have on the body. So walk us through what stress can do in the body.
Absolutely. So stress is by far probably one of my top three, top six root causes. And it's one of these root causes that so often it can go unnoticed. It can be so unconscious. On average, the average adult goes into a state of perceived stress with our stress response system being activated about 50 times a day. And really, very often do we even
Wow.
recognize it. Now,
Wow.
every time, I know it's mind blowing. And I think about how many times I even noticed that I was in a state of perceived stress. I couldn't easily name a dozen in a day. But there were definitely a lot of times where I had no idea that I was living in that state.
Mhm.
And what that means, whether you recognize it or not, or whether you leverage it or not, as your brain, your body goes into what we call stress response mode. And that's an acute mode. So if indeed you're driving and you're in your phone and you almost hit somebody, your body goes into action. That is a stress response system, and that is an acute stress response system. Over time, also, we use the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and we can continue to trigger that up multiple times. And what's really interesting is that the more in which it happens, the easier it is to get triggered up, if that makes any sense. So your body kind of gets used to kind of flipping that switch. I call it upregulating the HPA axis. And again, it's very unconscious. So often we don't know, but what we don't know is what's happening inside of the body. So I just want to walk you through what happens when you go in a state of perceived stress. One, the limbic system is alerted. The hypothalamus is alerted. And the hypothalamus is the master control center for your endocrine system. So it's running the show. And I will tell you right now, your hormones are running the entire show. They are mitigating all
Always,
of the
always
response.
and forever. Always
Always and
and
forever.
forever. Yes.
Things
Yes.
you don't think about. Your immune system is, your hormones are regulating that. Your breath rate, your hormones are regulating that. Whether your eyes dilate or not, your hormones are regulating that. How fast your blood pressure is, how fast your heart pumps, your hormones are regulating that. When you go to sleep and when you wake up in the morning, that's your hormones. Whether however you respond to insulin and glucose uptake inside of the cells, hormones, all of that. So I know we think about heavy periods and we think about migraines and we think about mood swings, but every single second of the day, the way that your body is operating is being manned by your hormones. And so we don't notice that. So again, our hypothalamus gets a message. It upregulates. It sends a message to the adrenals. It says, adrenals, we are an emergency session here. I don't know what's going to happen, because your brain can't differentiate the difference between you getting chased by some guy or a tiger and you just being late for a meeting, or you forgetting your child's homework, or you thinking you left the coffee pot on, or you getting a text message from your best friend about some crazy news that she just got. Your body doesn't know the difference. It honestly thinks that you may die. So then we upregulate epinephrine quickly in case it's a real emergency. And then we then bring in and co-elevate cortisol. Now, cortisol is a powerful universal hormone. It has profound effects on every single cell in the body. It can literally turn full systems off and turn full systems on. And the systems that we turn off is the reproductive system. So every time you go in that state of perceived stress, we shut that system off. We shut off the digestive system, and we start to we co-elevate insulin, because we think we need more energy. We think we may run. We need energy inside of those big muscles like our quads, our hamstrings, and our glutes. So we co-elevate insulin. And that's why when you go into these state of perceived stresses every day, it's the equivalent of eating a chocolate cupcake, except you don't get to even eat the cupcake. You
You
never
don't even
even
get to
had
enjoy
it.
it.
I don't even get to enjoy the cupcake. It's just your body's like, oh, we got cupcake time. And that is no fun. And that's why we have stubborn belly fat around the stomach. Is because your body, when it goes in that state of stress mode, we are saving energy. Honestly, your body thinks it's Armageddon, and anything that it can save and preserve, it's going to save and preserve. Also, when we're in a state of stress like that, emergency stress, it's not problem solving time. It's not willpower time. The cortex downregulates, our reasoning and rational center downregulates, because we're upregulating the survival center, the limbic system. So all of a sudden you've got cravings for sugary treats, for peanut M&Ms, or for Snickers, or whatever that may be, or Pringles chips, whatever that is, because your body thinks it's going to need that energy to survive. So willpower is gone. So when we're in a state of perceived stress throughout the day, it's no wonder we're craving things. We don't even have the ability to say no, because cortisol can shut that part of the brain down. And then one of the other systems that I'm always very concerned about is our thyroid. You can't have a thyroid issue without a stress problem. And I know for me that when I look at my Hashimoto's, which I was diagnosed with a couple years ago, that probably the two biggest root causes for me was trauma and perceived chronic stress. Because when you're in a state of stress, again, metabolism is first and foremost, and we need the thyroid to show up and to go and upregulate our ability to run if we need to do so. And when we shut down that part of the system, that's our reproductive system, that's where we begin to see low progesterone levels. We can actually even steal the mama hormone, pregnenolone. It can shunt the production of progesterone and other reproductive hormones for the production of more cortisol, if your body honestly needs to choose survival over reproduction. And where we see an increase in a drop in progesterone and kind of compared to estrogen is going to be because we're in that chronic state of stress, often and unconsciously throughout the day, every day.
Such a great explanation. I love everything you just said. You know, when we think about stress, what you're essentially doing is you're dumping energy into the periphery. So
Yes.
you are just taking it all away from, like you said, the reproductive system, the digestive system, your immune system. You know, who cares about fighting the bacterial infection if if it's a life or death situation, and you're just dumping it into the musculoskeletal system for that fight or flight, right? That sympathetic tone, that dominance there. And the other thing that I think really parses well with your story is we sacrifice the capacity for our mitochondria to now produce ATP, which is energy. For those of you who have nightmares of high school biology, adenosine triphosphate, that's the currency that we trade in every single day. That's our energetic currency. And we move from this mitochondrial, like very efficient way of producing ATP in the mitochondria. For my nerd army, this is like, I'm talking about oxidative
Yes.
phosphorylation.
Mhm.
And we move from OXPHOS and we move the energy production out of the mitochondria and now into the cytosol, into something called aerobic glycolysis. And so now we have, if I remember my numbers, it's about 15 times less efficient in terms of our energy production. And you have so eloquently said that this is going to start to affect our circadian biology. It's going to affect our sleep and wake signals, our hunger. We're going to be eating more crap because we
Yes.
have hyperinsulinemia. We have, we want that quick energy because we can no longer produce it ourselves in an efficient manner.
Well, and even go so far as when your mitochondria are stressed or they sense stress, your cell has that signal where it's like, this is an unsafe environment. Not even, we go so far as to actually shutting down mitochondrial function entirely.
Yes.
So they completely hibernate.
Yes.
And that's where that chronic fatigue comes from. That is literally the definition of chronic fatigue, is mitochondrial dysfunction due to high levels of stress, high levels of trauma, co-elevation of infections, which are also driven by stress, right? And the co-elevation of insulinemia. Those are all the things that tell your mitochondria, this is an unsafe environment to function in. It's time to hibernate. Maybe this body's going to implode.
Yeah.
And so it gets even deeper where we start to see all of that shut down. So it's no wonder over time, more and more of those mitochondria get the signal, start sleeping on the job, and we don't have the energy to literally function anymore, to spend time with our families, to have deep relationships with our partners and our friendships, to go into the community work that we want to do, because we're literally just in survival mode. And probably, I remember the most selfish place that I was at was a place where I was running myself into the ground because I had nothing else to give anyone else. I was only able to just get by. And it's that big lesson of how do we nourish and honor our bodies so that we can really show up for the people that matter most to us.
So well said. All right. So now we have this, we are armed
Yes.
with this information in terms of the diabolical consequences that cortisol and stress can have in the body, leading to things like estrogen dominance. We talked about the pregnenolone steal. So now let's get into perimenopause and menopause. So this is, let's just start off with, how do we know? How do we know that we're in perimenopause? What, when, and how, and what's happening?
It is, it's a spectrum. Perimenopause is a spectrum. Menopause is a spectrum. You don't one day just wake up and bam, you're in perimenopause and you're in menopause. Women, it really varies. We know that early onset menopause is going to be menopause before the age of 40. But menopause can happen anywhere between the ages of 45 to 58, 60 years old. It really depends on the woman. And then we know that menopause can actually be surgically induced, chemically induced. It can come on for a number of reasons. But we do know that if it's before the age of 40, we kind of define that as a really early menopause. Where women begin to start to feel changes, and it can really vary for some women, but I would say the earliest signs of kind of perimenopause shifts and changes is going to be 35, 36. And why I think that is the case, like looking at all the research, talking to so many women, reading all the books. If there's a book on perimenopause, if there's an article on perimenopause, I have read it. And again, I think what's, and I'm just going to put this out there, but what really breaks my heart is how little attention we have chosen to focus on this transition in women's life in the medical community. We have really failed women in this area, especially the distinction between perimenopause and menopause. I would say that most doctors do not know it. Most doctors don't know because we really just haven't looked into it. I think we're
scared of it too. I think we're culturally like, oh my God, that's like the end of your life. You're going to lose your hair. You're going to turn into an old hag. Like there's all this cultural dogma around menopause. And like, listen, I just saw J-Lo and Shakira, halftime, we were recording this like a couple days after the Super Bowl halftime show. Like I plan on, come on, like that's menopause. I mean, maybe, I don't know if Shakira is there yet, but like
Shakira's definitely not there yet, but yeah, J-Lo is in menopause. She is making menopause look like nobody's business. My mama too. I'm Latina, so I would let everyone know I'm Latina. And to see Shakira and J-Lo on that stage, oh my goodness. And I know there's a controversy about it, but those women own their mamas. They're working mamas. They own their bodies. They own their power. They own that moment, especially for Latina women to represent on the Super Bowl stage. It's just so, so powerful. There's so so much good that performance. And you know what? When so much good at a performance like that, and we up level the game at that level, we're gonna feel some hate. We're gonna feel a little
Yeah.
controversy on that,
Right.
because it really stretched people in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And not everyone's ready for that expansion. I was so ready for that expansion. I
I
was
have
like, more
watched
of
it
that.
like I've watched
I
it like
have to.
6 times, and every time it gets better. I'm like, "Oh my god."
I have watched it. Okay, I've watched as many times as you have, but I've
Yeah.
watched it 4 to 5 times, and I am always in
Oh,
pure awe. And I just want to say that I am always in awe of women.
yes.
Women blow my mind. They always do. I am amazed at how much we can do, our capacity, our expansion, our service, our love. It's we are why the world goes round. I mean, that's what
Yes.
I truly do believe, we're the reason why the world goes, mainly because we have the babies that make the world go around. That's for sure. Um, okay, so perimenopause. So 35, 36, and I think really what's happening there is inflammation. I think a lot of what's going on is those early signs of inflammation. I talked about those root causes, and I'm just going to name them really quickly. And just note that when those root causes are at play, that they're going to have a profound impact on our hormones. And so we can saunter into perimenopause and menopause, or we could have a really hard time with perimenopause and menopause. It's emotional, it's physical, it's mental, it's all of those things. Not only do we need to change the paradigm for how we see it, that we look at it as a time of owning our power. We're smarter, we're stronger, we're able to bring more people in to help support us. You know, the teams that Shakira and JLo have to become the super women that they are, right? We get to bring teams in to really step into our power at this time. But there are root causes that can really kind of set us off course, and they can even happen earlier than our mid to late 30s. It's just when oftentimes women are really beginning to feel it.
Yeah.
So those root causes for me, and all of the study that I've looked at, kind of the scientific literature, are going to be trauma, whether it's big T's or little t's. Trauma absolutely manifests in the body and can have a profound impact on our hormone system. Perceived stress, which we talked about, can happen many times during the day, whether we know it or not. Nutrient deficiencies. So for our brain and our body and our mitochondria and our hormones to work, we need nutrients to function. If we don't have those, we're going to struggle. Gut dysbiosis and leaky gut syndrome. So we have a microbiome issue, or we've got a proliferation in the epithelial layer of our gut. We're going to see things like autoimmune conditions. We're going to see an immune system attack. Then we've got co-infections, things like mold, viruses, bacteria, parasites. Those are a big one as well. And then toxins, environmental toxins that I mentioned earlier, solvents, parabens, plastics, xenoestrogens. Those are the root causes. And those types of root causes, those 5, are going to drive, again, hormonal dysfunction. And if we've got many of those at play in our mid-30s, as things begin to shift a little bit, we may start to feel a little bit tired. We may start to get those headaches. We may start to feel bloating and constipation. We may start to feel the fibrocystic breast, and our cycle isn't 100% on. Some months it's spotty, some months it's heavy. We begin to see some of these things at play. And at the end of the day, a lot of what these root causes are driving is an inflammatory response in the system. And as we step into early 40s, mid 40s, we definitely see some changes in our ovarian function. The first hormone that's going to drop and dip is going to be progesterone. So it is no surprise and no wonder why the majority of women in perimenopause 100% have estrogen dominance. If any of those root causes are at play and we start to see a slow dip in progesterone levels, we're going to have an imbalance between estrogen and progesterone. And while doctors are just trying to prescribe birth control and hormone therapy to us, we really need to look at the elephants in the room. We need to dig into that root cause and see, what could be driving these symptoms. Is it something going on with my gut? Is it the stress that I've been dealing with at work, or that I'm, my parents have moved in, or whatever those things may be happening? Is it that I'm struggling with the trauma that I had when I was younger? So just looking at those things, as the hormone system starts to shift, if we've got some of those causes that are driving inflammation in the body, it's going to make that spectrum a lot more difficult versus not.
And I think I love that you called it a spectrum, because I think that most people will be shocked to learn that, mid 30s is when we start to see the sex hormones start to decline. Clinically, what I've observed, and you can tell me if this has been the same for you, the biggest clue for me, if a woman is in that on the perimenopausal spectrum, we'll call it, is her menstrual cycle. She starts to notice things like it's a bit shorter. She's like, oh, it came a little like a day or two earlier this month. Weird. And then as she kind of goes through it, then towards the end of menopause, it's like they lengthen. So it starts off like, it's coming a little quicker. And then as she sort of goes through, some of the symptoms that you described, she may start to notice that the length of the cycle. So for me, the biggest clue has always been looking at the cycle length and flow, because in our mid 40s, it starts to become, as you were saying, like quite irregular. And the other thing that's tricky, it's so tricky, is in women women in their 30s and their 40s, we are starting to deal with aging parents. We are
Mhm.
starting to, I have young children. Many women may have young children that they're trying to raise, and along with all the challenges that being a parent, comes with. And then you have career. So you just sort of feel like all these tenants, all these like tentacles of your life are pulling on you. And it's like, am I stressed or am I in perimenopause? I don't know. So it can be really confusing.
Or both.
Or it's
It's
both, because
both.
it's both because of the perceived stress that we were talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's absolutely 100% both. And I think it's how we manage our body and nourish our body in this time that's really going to dictate what that spectrum is going to look like.
Yeah.
I mean, the things that we cannot change is that progesterone is going to start to decrease. It's
Hmm.
going to be because it's the pregnancy hormone, right? It's what keeps us pregnant. It's what really sets us up to maintain a pregnancy. And as we get to a point where we're not going to be um, having the ovaries and having the structure to have babies anymore. That's what menopause is that we're ceasing to be reproductive. We're not going to be having children. Doesn't mean that we're not still amazing,
Hmm.
but we know that those hormones are going to shift. And why the cycle is getting shorter, why our period is even getting shorter, is really that decrease in progesterone levels.
Yeah.
And then as we get closer to menopause, it's the up and down roller coaster of estrogen. Sometimes estrogen is going to be super high, sometimes it's going to be plummeting. So some months your cycle and your period is going to be shorter, other months you're going to be seriously heavy bleeding. You're going to be bleeding for weeks at a time. It can be a
Yeah.
very, very scary time, but just note that it's just a part of that kind of roller coaster cycle, that menopause spectrum, that you're getting close to kind of the defining moment of menopause, which is you haven't had a period for a full year. And then that's defining moment. And then from there on out, you're just in menopause. There's not a post-menopause. It's just at that point, we kind of just decided that that's kind of the day of like the moment of menopause. And then we just continue in that space. And the beautiful thing is we really can redefine what midlife looks like for us, but it's about how we take care of our bodies. Perimenopause can look very, very different, depending on what you're doing and how you're taking care of yourself, how you're taking care of all of those obligations. It's by far probably when we're the most responsible for so many people, our career, our family, our parents, our children, our communities. We really are stretched thin in a lot of ways. So it's very, very easy for us to sacrifice ourselves for the greater good of everybody else. And
Yeah.
that's when we really see the symptoms really hike up.
And special shout out to our androgen dominant women, our PCOS ladies, because this is going to be particularly important for them, because you need to ovulate in order to produce progesterone. So if they are anovulatory and they're missing their periods, they are going to be even more susceptible to everything that you were just saying. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And we look at the kind of the general spectrum of all of that, how often the PCOS is missed, how often estrogen dominance is
Or
missed,
they're given the pill,
or we're just given, or the
yeah,
solution is
yeah,
birth control pill.
yeah,
And we know, I know you've had Dr. Jillian Brighton on the show, and we talk a lot about this on my show, but birth control is just early onset menopause as far as I'm concerned. Like, it literally just shuts everything off. And so if you had a fighting chance to regulate and get to the root cause of what was going on, birth control really hampers our ability to figure out what's going on and to actually address the root cause of the situation.
yeah. I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying. I am not a fan of the birth control pill for a solution for anything. I think it actually moves you further away from solving the problem. So, speaking of solutions, let's move into those, because we've
Yeah.
really defined a lot of the issues, what things can look like. You have been so open and honest and transparent. And let me just shout you out for a minute, caught being awesome, because it is so refreshing to have someone with your accolades. And just for the listeners, how many books have you written?
7 books so far to date, and a
Yeah.
manuscript for my menopause and perimenopause book in March of this year.
Okay. So you have achieved success on a scale that not many can claim. And being so, you know, transparent and honest with your journey is so refreshing. So I wanted to maybe talk to you around some of the things that have helped you personally, and also some of the recommendations that you have for the women that you work with. So I want to divide them into 3 silos, and tell me if I've missed one. I love
Yes.
to talk about this in terms of physical reduction of stress or inflammation, emotional reduction, so mindset work, and mental health, and then chemicals. So that can be dietary, it can be, like you were saying, xenoestrogens, perfumes, makeup, that kind of thing. So let's talk about
Some nasty things.
nasty things. Yeah. And I have a question for you about makeup,
Yes.
because I need some help in the makeup department. But okay, so physically, what have been how has I would love to know how your training and your exercise, your movement routines, how those have shifted to support your
Mm.
hormones, and if you have protocols that you'd like to share with our listeners in terms of physicality.
Absolutely. Well, a couple of years ago, I'll share a quick story. I had put on 10 pounds and I didn't know why. And I mean, my stress levels, they felt pretty normal. I was writing my last book and I was getting ready to launch that book. And I was trying everything. Stephanie, I was working out like twice a day. I was doing Orange Theory. I was restrictive eating. I wasn't doing intermittent fasting yet, but I was really being mindful. And I would come back from the gym and I had nothing left in the tank. I had nothing for nobody. And it was very cardiovascular driven exercises, and I realized that what I was doing in that gym was creating a chronic fatigue. I knew I knew that. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm falling into chronic fatigue again. What's happening?
Mm,
And I thought weight was the root cause. Like you were talking about how, why do I want to kill everybody
yeah,
one day out of the month?
yeah,
And how do you not see it?
I
Like, weight
know.
is never the cause. It's
Yeah.
only it's a symptom of a greater, bigger issue. And I was spinning circles, and then finally my eyebrows started falling out. My brain fog started coming. I was cold all the time. I was getting constant. I was getting constipated. I was like, what is going on? And I mean, I knew we were running hormone labs, we were running thyroid labs, we weren't looking at the antibodies, and everything looked normal. Finally, I was like, you just get this download where you're just like, oh my gosh, it's got to be, maybe, please don't let it be
Mm,
Hashimoto's.
mm,
And sure enough, it was. And I remember in this moment that it all just kind of came together. We so often, we trying to treat the symptom of what it is, when we got to look at the whole picture. And working out, I've worked out since I was 18 years old. And I always had this mindset: if it wasn't hard, if I wasn't kicking my own butt, if I wasn't doing 100 burpees, then I am wasting my time. And
didn't
that's
count.
yes, it didn't
Yeah,
count. It's a
yeah,
high achiever's attitude about
yeah,
everything.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I know it's so many of you women listening right now, it's your attitude too. And I had to just take a moment, step back, and honor my body. It was clearly telling me, this is driving you into the ground. And I shifted my workouts. And so what I have found for women, particularly with hormone issues, is weight training. I think weight training is one of the most powerful ways that we can support our musculature, that we can support our mitochondria, that we can support our energy reserves without burning out. So I weight training, yoga, hiking, walking, and there's times where even just those are appropriate, right? Where you're resetting the body. So I think it's listening to your body. I have an episode on my podcast on working out for Hashimoto's, but really any kind of chronic condition, and really what it dialed down to, and all the research that I found is that weight training is one of the best things we can do without burning ourselves out. And so many of the other workouts out there are, sprinting and racing and plyometrics. I feel like those can really just kind of lend us back to where we're kind of back to ground zero, where we're at.
Especially if you're, again, a driven woman. I am putting myself in that category.
You are, girl.
Like, yeah, and I have, there's been times where I've had women come to me and they say, I'm doing, and I'm not trying to poo-poo on any, it's like, I'm doing Soul Cycle like 5 times a week, or I'm doing,
I've been that girl.
Yeah.
I've totally been that girl.
Right. And they're like, but I can't lose the belly weight. Like, I don't understand. And it's like, it's because your body is holding on to that fat like an insurance policy, because you're not allowing yourself to recover. So I love what you're saying about weight training. I am a big, I
know you are, girl.
Resistance training is goddamn magical. I'm just going to,
magical.
It's just, and you know what, if you love carbs, the more muscle you have, the more carbohydrate tolerance you have, because you are going to be able to dump that glucose into the muscle. And once it's in the muscle, girls, it doesn't get out. It's like you go to Vegas, whatever happens there, it stays there. Same thing with glucose and muscles. Yes. You get glucose in the muscle, they don't go anywhere. It stays in the muscle.
They can't leave.
You got it. You got it. So I love that.
Yes. Especially if you're coming to us and you're like, Dr. Maritza, Dr. Stephanie, I've got endometriosis, I got lupus, I got Hashimoto's, I've got chronic fatigue, where you're not going to burn. And be mindful, like, listen to your body. You're not training for 2 hours in the gym, weight training. Be mindful. There are times where 30 minutes weight training is all. I just know my body. That's the end of that workout. Like, I just know where, what is going to serve me and fuel me without burning me out. And so just being mindful, because all of us are kind of probably, I know I've been back on the ground multiple times. I know that I am just a couple of bad habits away of being back in a state of chronic stress. And so I'm really, really careful around that. But I love to move my body. I've loved to move it. I'm 40 years old right now. I've been loving to move it since over 20 years. And so it's, you want to do what you love, but then honor your body in the process.
Love that. Let's move into chemistry or chemical, dietary changes, makeups, perfume. And I will pre-frame this by saying I need some help in the makeup department. Like, I love my makeup. So if you have any brands that you like, or you have, I need a good red lip tint. That's natural.
Good red lip tint.
Yeah.
If I were to name a good red lip tint, the company that I love for a red lip tint is going to be a beauty. I do love Beauty Counter for their lipsticks.
Oh, beauty. Yeah.
Yeah, I do love them for their lipsticks. I don't necessarily love them for their foundations, but I do. I know my lip gloss is probably wearing off, but I have one of their lip glosses on right now. So that would be the one for lip tint that I love a lot. So that would be a good one to look at.
Cool.
So yes, so let's talk about, oh my goodness, estrogen dominance, very rampant. It gets to a point where you just think that your breasts are supposed to be tender and lumpy, because you're just like, aren't they just always like this?
Yeah, this is the new normal.
This is my new normal. Yeah. But when we run my Dutch test many years ago, I was like, oh my goodness, I was like too many estrogen metabolites. And I knew that the environmental toxins in my home weren't serving me. I was using, I grew up with Comment, and I grew up with Glade plugins and Pledge and Windex, the bright blue stuff. And so we got rid of all of it. And I have one of my books, I have recipes all day, every day for everything you could possibly imagine. But you go to Target and you walk down the 20 aisles of cleaning products, it's just insane. Yeah. And really, you need 5 ingredients. You need vinegar, baking soda, hot water, some essential oils like lemon and tea tree oil, and some rubbing alcohol. It's really, and guess what? You have all of that in your house already, and you can make over all of your cleaning products. So making over your green cleaning products, making swapping out those personal care. It's going to be the hardest thing to do, is swapping out the personal care, because I know you probably, we all love the things that we love, right? So that's the hardest one to do. And then making over our medicine cabinet, finding more solutions for that as well. So just being really mindful about our toxic load, because for women, there's literally, there are obesogens in our shampoo and conditioner and our Glade plugins, and literally shift the way leptin and ghrelin work inside of our bodies. So just being mindful about what we touch and what we consume every day is going to be important. But I have to say, the number one, the magic around getting our hormones and getting our body back on track. Because as I talked about those root causes, it can feel a little arduous, the idea of having to go and dig for them. And goodness knows, when I got diagnosed with Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune condition of the thyroid, the first question I asked myself is, what's the root cause? What is causing this to happen? Why is my immune system targeting my thyroid? I got to figure this out. And without that foundation, which is nutrition, 100%, without the nutrition foundation, it is so much harder to figure out what that root cause actually is. And so there are foods that are absolutely hormone sabotaging, inflammation creating, that we have got to just push to the wayside. Whether it's just for a month, it's for 14 days, it's got to at least be, I would say 21 days. You got to break up with these foods, because you need to give your gut, you need to give your liver, you need to give your mitochondria a chance, a fighting chance to restore and replenish. So my big heavy hitters when it comes to breaking up with foods, and nobody likes this list, is going to be: corn has got to go, eggs have got to go, grains have got to go, dairy's got to go, alcohol's got to go, coffee's got to go, sugar's got to go. And then depending on your sensitivities, potentially nightshades, peppers, tomatoes, eggplant, got to go. And then if you're really looking into something, even maybe seeds and legumes. It's all a spectrum, but the first ones I mentioned were the ones that really, and I think that there's an internal knowing that, yes, we've got to give our bodies a break. And I will tell you right now, I'm in Hashimoto's remission, because here's the thing about an autoimmune condition, is it's never fully gone. You can just keep it in remission. But the one habit, the one thing that was the big game change for me, was a combination of hormone loving foods and removing the hormone sabotaging foods and intermittent fasting. That combination of the two is what has kept me in Hashimoto's remission after digging into those root causes. And I can't emphasize how important, how many tens of thousands of women I've been able to serve and support, that nutrition has always been the number one thing that we need to do, that we've got to do to heal our bodies. It determines what perimenopause is going to look like. It determines what menopause is going to look like. And it really determines literally chronic conditions, cellular longevity. It's all determined by what we put into our bodies.
That's excellent. I love that list, even though I'm already like, do you distinguish between dairy sugars and dairy fats? Is it all dairy? Is it, I have all these,
dairy.
It's all dairy. I'm like,
it's all
the butter too? Yeah, all
butter
gone.
too.
She's all
gone.
All right. And what about, I guess my next question, because I have found the one thing I counsel people on, and I want to know if you agree with this, is as much as their budget allows for, to be able to buy, if they're meat eaters, to be able to buy organic, grass-fed, grass-finished beef, poultry products, because, this, and I had Dr. Mark Hyman on the show a couple of weeks ago now, and we were talking about, industrial, agricultural, regenerative agricultural practices versus industrial farming practices. And these animals that are raised in this conventional way, they have horrible lives, they have horrible deaths, and then we consume them, and they are full of hormones, they are full of antibiotics. So to your point around hormone dysregulation and gut dysbiosis, we are consuming all the antibiotics that those animals have consumed. And he was telling me, I couldn't believe this. He was saying that like conventional, like cattle, they're fed candy, and of course the high fructose corn syrup, the corn, all the stuff that's not native to their diet, ground up other animal. It was just disgusting, just feces, all this stuff. So I always say to people, especially if you are estrogen dominant, which I find most women, like in my view
World. Yeah.
world, you are sort of you sort of have chronic low grade inflammation and stress until proven otherwise, and you are likely going to have some estrogen dominance issues from it. Is to buy organic beef. Like that for me is that's been such a big thing in my own, whenever
Absolutely.
I refuse now to eat anything that is not organic. I'm at the restaurant, it's not organic, I don't have it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, we don't eat at a lot of restaurants. We cook almost predominantly at the house. I
Mhm.
think I thought that organic was already a given. So I apologize for that. And and for me, when I was really focused on, we eat a lot of wild game. We eat a lot of lamb. We eat a lot of fish,
Mm.
wild caught fish. We eat a lot of buffalo. So we're even super mindful. I don't eat any chicken at all because of the concern around amyloids. And so it's it depends on how mindful do you want to get, but yes, organic foods as much as possible, or grass-fed organic meat as much as possible. We have to be so mindful about the glyphosate, the GMOs, the herbicides and pesticides. This is the toxic burden that your liver is having to manage, your gut is having to manage. And we wonder why we see so much gut permeability, so much leaky gut. And it's because of the amount of pesticides and herbicides, and toxic exposure that our gut is having to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Now,
Mhm.
it can be a little bit harder when you travel. We take a lot of snacks with us when we travel, but really being mindful of the type of restaurants that you choose. I think all of that, it's really that mindfulness around what you're eating, how you eat it, how you're preparing it. But I find that cooking at home in batches, making sure it's all organic, and only focusing on those hormone loving foods, to me, it's the number one ticket to getting your body back on track.
Yeah, like Mark Hyman said something like, salmon is one of the healthiest things on the planet. If it wasn't 2020, it would be the perfect food, right? To your point around the amyloids and like he was talking about, mercury and
And farm
accumulation.
fish, yeah.
Yeah, farm fish. Yeah. Let's move into emotional health, mental health. I have a couple of things that I absolutely think are game changers, but I would love your thoughts
Yes.
on this as well.
So I know I said that food is everything. Food, intermittent fasting, loving those mitochondria is everything. But I also know that you cannot green smoothie your way out of chronic stress,
Yeah.
because I tried and I failed. I thought if I could just whip up a green smoothie, and I could make a green smoothie in 5 minutes or less, and I could run out the door in high heels like a Tasmanian devil with lip gloss on, um, organic lip gloss,
Yeah.
out the door, and I would run off to a meeting drinking my smoothie as I'm driving the car 90 miles an hour on the freeway. And I thought that I was like, I got this stress thing on lock. Like you got to bring in the mindfulness. And so I know a lot of women are thinking that, and if the thought comes into your mind, I don't have time for mindfulness, I don't have time for stress reduction, then you are exactly the person who needs to hear this part of this interview. Because I honestly thought that was me. I thought there was no time in the day to take care of me, until I was so sick that the only thing I could do was take care of me. And none of us want to get to that point. I can't reiterate it enough. So the first thing I recommend, if this is a new area of focus, is to have a morning ritual and an evening ritual, that you bookend your day selfishly, that it is your time, and that your morning ritual can look like grabbing an essential oil, like a wild orange essential oil, and breathing it in because it boosts happy neurotransmitters. It could be making that green smoothie, making your matcha latte. It could be journaling in your favorite journal. My favorite journal is right here, called Speed Dial the Universe. I've got my little favorite journal.
Oh,
It
that's
could
beautiful.
be
Mm.
like a 5-minute meditation. It doesn't have to be a 20-minute meditation. I know there's probably amazing meditation gurus who would tell you the opposite, but anything is better than nothing. Like I always say, do what you can with what you got where you're at right now, right? And so, and doing what you love. I think it's really important when you're creating these morning and evening rituals to ask yourself, what would I love? And even go a step further and sit down and create a joy list and ask yourself, what would I love? And create 10 things that are free that you love. And it may be even the first time you've ever asked yourself this, like you've learned about yourself. And it may be 10 things that don't cost a lot of money, but cost a little bit of money. Like for me, I love buying flowers every week. I love cutting them, trimming them, putting them in vases, and putting them all over the house. And it's probably about an hour activity it takes for me to do it, give or take. But it's one of the things that brings me so much joy every single week in my life, is to do that activity, is to buy flowers and put them around the house. So thinking about, having that joy list, creating that free list and the cost a little bit of money list, and then pick 3 things that you want to do from that joy list and integrate them into your life. And how you do that is you take this fancy little thing called a phone, and you look at your calendar, which literally dictates your entire life, and you schedule in your morning ritual. You schedule in your joy activities. You schedule in your evening ritual so that you are getting that deep, restful sleep, that high quality sleep that you need. The other thing that I recommend is taking the same little phone that could get you in more trouble than not, but we're going to use it to your benefit. And I recommend setting a chime for every 90 minutes, maybe even every 60 minutes. So let's say unconsciously, that you get into a state of chronic stress unconsciously, like you own it today. You're like, okay, Dr. Maritza, 50 times a day, holy cannoli, Batman, what do I do about that? And you're not even aware of it, is have a chime for every 60 minutes on your phone that goes off. And in those 60 seconds, like that every 60 minutes, in that 5-minute period, you get up, you walk around, maybe you take a lavender essential oil, and you do a breathwork exercise that really gets you centered back into your body, that gets you being in the now, and literally resets the sympathetic track over to the parasympathetic track. So from fight or flight over to rest and digest. And if it's in the phone and the little chime goes off, whether you like it or not, you've been scheduled to take a break and to do something that's good for yourself. So those are some of my strategies and techniques for a high achieving woman who's got a high achieving schedule to begin to take care of herself.
And hopefully, I actually love that I have an alarm that goes off on my phone 3 times a day, and it has my my core desired. So I do Danielle Laporte's core desire map. So 3 times a day, it tells me I am glamorous, I am luminous, just my phone reminds me. So it's almost like this Pavlovian conditioning that's happened. I'm like 2 o'clock, yes, me, I'm glamorous now. I'm strong, I'm confident, I got all my words. So I love that, and I would also add the meditation and the mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
I love that you're giving people permission to just do 5 minutes, because again, high achieving, I was like, if I'm going to meditate, I'm going to murder this meditation. I am going to be so good at meditating. And I would, and then I would notice my mind wandering, and I would like, you know what, I suck at this. I hate it, and it took me a long time. I had Emily Fletcher, who I know that, she was on the podcast as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love Ziva meditation. And some days I am rocking my Ziva meditation, and other days it's a 5-minute meditation. And I do not beat myself up over it. Again, doing what you can with what you got right now in this moment is the best. It's the best we can do, but it's just a matter of just giving your mind space. Giving your mind that space to just be in the now, be in the present, reset those brain waves. Even that 5 minutes can make a world of difference in your life.
It really does. And what it's really done for me is it's increased my resilience. So we all have stressors. Things happen through the day. As you were saying, 50 times a day, we're going into that stress response. But we're able to, at least my experience has been with a meditation practice. And some days, like you said, it's 5 minutes. Some days it's 20, and, it ebbs and flows. But when I have to make a withdrawal from my stress, for my bank account, I have a lot more to draw out from. So I'm not freaking out. I have much more reserves in me to be able to handle the stress with the grace and the ease that I want to be able to handle it with.
And that's what it's all about. It's all about the ease and the grace and giving ourselves that level of resilience. And we all have that friend that we know who the same situation can happen to them at the same time, and it's like nothing happened, right? We have the friend who that has that resilience where everything rolls off their back, right? Everything just goes right off. And it's like, how do you get to that place? And it really is about mindfulness. It's really about meditation and giving yourself that expansion to have resilience. And we do that through food. We do that through breath work. We do that through our morning ritual. We do it. I mean, if anyone messes with my evening ritual, I'll cut them.
Yeah.
It's my time.
That's the Latina.
It is my
Don't
time.
mess. Yeah.
Don't mess with me.
Yeah.
Everything goes like
Yeah.
the curtains shut. It's, blackout curtains.
Yeah.
I got my book. I've got my essential oil blend. I got my little spritzer that I spritz on the bed.
Mm-hmm.
I got my affirmations. I
Mm-hmm.
have there's this a whole thing that I do to get ready for bedtime, and it is my most cherished time. And we get to have that. There was a time where I was like, I would just run into bed. It was like a Tasmanian devil into bed, and I would sit there because the mental chatter would just not stop. I would lay there with to-do lists and worry lists and all the lists, and I would wake up so drained. And
Mm-hmm.
we deserve to wake up with energy. We deserve to wake up feeling like we can conquer the world. And there's just little things that we can do to put in place to really create that for ourselves. But that first step is giving ourselves permission, and saying yes to us is really what it comes down to. We get to say yes to us so that we can do the big things in the world that we were meant to do.
So wonderfully said. And you mentioned before, I just wanted to circle back to it. You are currently writing a book on the topics that we've discussed today, yes?
Yes, I am.
And do you know when it's going to be released? We'll make sure that I'll link to all of your books in the show notes, but do you have sort of an idea of when it's going to be released?
I do. So April of 21.
Okay.
It'll be a while. So yeah, so in the world of book writing, sometimes it's like the book is due in March, and then it takes the publishing house like a full year to get it ready. So
Right. And
we're a ways out.
I have to tell you, I am in the process of writing. I was telling you this a little bit in the pre-chat, in the process of writing my first book. And I just bow down to you, Doc, because 7 books, I feel like I'm birthing a book baby, and it has a big head, and it is just long and arduous and painful at times. And, yeah, so writing, I'll be so excited when your book comes out. I'm really looking forward to it. If people you've mentioned your podcast a few times, let's plug your podcast. If people want to find you, where we can find out more about you and your work.
Absolutely. So the podcast is literally focused on women's hormone health, helping women become the CEO of their health. And we do deep dives into major hormone concerns like PCOS, estrogen dominance. I'm actually writing a solo episode for estrogen dominance right now. I want women to know the testing. I want them to know what to look for, what to demand, and then, what the program, what the protocol is to get them back on track. So it's called Essentially You Podcast. And then my website is drmaritza.com. And my Instagram, where I absolutely love to connect with people, is also at Dr. Maritza. That's DrMariza. And I'm so excited to be able to connect. Any of you have questions, I would love to help you answer them.
And I've been a guest on your podcast, and it is
yes,
you
have.
It is a great podcast. I love your podcast. You do a really great job.
Oh my God, our interview was amazing because you are so amazing. We talked about intermittent fasting, cellular longevity, and what it looks like for leveraging nutrition and honoring our mitochondria to support our hormones, because no surprise, it is all interconnected.
Thank you so much for your time today. We are probably about 90 minutes into this conversation, something like that. And it's just been, you just know your stuff. It is so lovely to have a conversation with you. I love you. I honor you. Thank you so much for spending the time with me today.
Thank you so much for having me, honey.